Hello, my friends, my family, my community, my tribe. Welcome to the Hippie Moms Podcast. Oh, yeah. What's up, everyone? Happy day. I don't know what day it is for you that you're listening to this, but today is Monday. And I used to hate Mondays, but now I decided I want to love Mondays. I love Mondays. And you know why I love them so much is because I finally get to do what I love to do. And one of those things is podcasting. You guys, I am so excited to share this podcast with you. I got to interview Sam Shore. He's with Alchemy Wellness, and he is incredibly educated on medical and medicinal cannabis. And this was a really awesome conversation. I am definitely an advocate for plant medicine of every kind, whether it be herbs or spices or, more intense plant medicine like psilocybin or in THC, what we're talking about today. I think the world is changing. Actually, I know the world is changing as we start to see more states legalize it. And we start to see how medical marijuana, these compounds within marijuana, have incredibly healing and therapeutic benefits. But the thing is, you got to know what you're using. And I think, let me just tell you, we talk a little bit about this. I mean, the marijuana that we used back in college, and I'm 42, almost 42, is a lot different than the medicinal marijuana you're going to go in and find at a dispensary. Okay. So it's really important to get educated on it and just understand kind of the basics about it. So Sam was born and raised in Philadelphia, and he attended Pennsylvania State University and University of South Florida. He has been in the healthcare industry for over 12 years, and 10 of those years he worked in pharmaceuticals. He sold drugs for the pharmaceutical industry. And then he finally woke up. And he'll talk more about this, but the last 2 years he has been spent in the medical cannabis industry. So when he was worked for the pharmaceutical industry, he launched topical pain medicine, Schedule II narcotics, migraine medicine, and many other first-to-market medications. And now, obviously, he's moved on to working in medicinal marijuana and has been... It's so great. He works with patients in their cannabis journey, and he's super passionate about educating patients, caregivers, healthcare providers, anyone and everyone that's going to listen, okay, about the potential relief one can be received by using medical cannabis. The beautiful thing with medical cannabis is that the side effects, it's not a 40-second or really 2-minute long list of side effects like you hear when you watch anything on TV and you see these pharmaceutical drugs. I mean, the symptoms sound freaking worse than the actual condition they are quote unquote curing, you guys. This is what just drives me nuts. So really, the thing is that I just hope to open your mind. Maybe you're here, you're already open to the potential of medicinal cannabis and its potential to help you or other people really struggling with things that normally you would just go and get a prescription for, right? But thank God we have evolved and we are using plant medicine as it should, because plants and humans, we are so similar, and our bodies can truly communicate with this plant medicine rather than petrochemicals that are made in labs by men. I mean, you just really take Mother Nature out of the whole equation, if you ask me. So Sam, he suffered from depression and anxiety, and in about a year ago, he launched Canna Health and Wellness LLC, a company focused on educating people on the potential benefits that they can receive by using medical cannabis. So Sam's used cannabis for over 20 years to help manage his depression, anxiety, his triggers, and minimize his symptoms. And he's had a variable degree of failures and success, and he looks forward to sharing his experience here and with other people. So let's just get into it. I hope you enjoy this. I sure learned a lot and really enjoyed talking to Sam. So I hope you enjoy it too. Tell me about your journey from being, were you a pharmaceutical rep? Is that what you were doing?
Yes. Yeah, so I was a pharmaceutical rep. I got into pharmaceuticals over 12 years ago here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've sold everything from pain patches to Schedule II narcotics that are no longer on the market because they were a major part of the opioid epidemic. And I was very, very proud of what I was doing. I was trained very, very well, and I was fortunate enough to be in a position to be able to influence prescribers out there and to be able to, but at the same time, be very, very upfront and honest. And when a prescriber would identify, say, hey, I'm going to use this patient, I'm going to describe this patient to you, and I'm going to use this medication that you're promoting with this patient. And I would say, no, 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 no. The patient that you're describing is not the best patient for my medication. And they would always be very surprised by that because they'd be like, well, your job is not to promote your competitors. Your job is to promote and get prescriptions for your medication. But at the same time, my job is to make sure that prescribers as well as patients were having positive experiences on the prescription medication. And not only was I, and I say this not certainly not proudly, but not only was I a pharmaceutical rep, but I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. I mean, I consumed a lot of the medications that I was actually promoting. I mean, I was a chronic pain patient. I was an athlete all through school, so I've got chronic pain. I was a wrestler, and so I've got chronic pain in my shoulder. I was told I need shoulder surgery. So instead of having shoulder surgery, I started popping Schedule II narcotics. And so, yeah, I bought into all of those things. But at the same time, I was always a cannabis consumer. And I think I was a cannabis consumer then the way that a lot of people were and a lot of people still are today,
Yes.
where they're using cannabis in a medicinal way. They just don't realize it.
Right. I love that. So, okay. So that is really fascinating how you were really bought into this type of this thinking, right? That these medications were truly helping people, right? Especially when, especially the painkillers. I think that's a big one. Was there a point where you were like, I'm addicted to these painkillers?
No, I was fortunate enough that I'd never had an issue, but it was also very scary that the pain specialist that I got my prescription from would write me a prescription and have 3 different pain pills on that prescription and would give me like a 120-day supply and would trust me that I was using it responsibly. I was also the representative that was coming into his office and I was dressed up all professional. So he said, you don't look like you're an addict. You don't look like you're diverting it, selling it on the corner of a shady street or anything like that. And that certainly wasn't being done, but can you really be that easily fooled? And I'll never forget, there was this one day that I pulled into a doctor's office in town, and it looked like on the outside of the doctor's office, it looked like a methadone clinic where people were literally strung out, hanging out outside, sitting on the sidewalk, waiting to get into this doctor's office to get their prescription of their narcotic.
Wow, that's crazy. I want to talk to the fact that, just like we can have functioning alcoholics, you can have functioning painkiller
Of
addicts.
course, of
And
course.
and I think that, people get to this point because doctors are, they're also I don't know if they're indoctrinated in this, in through their training, all their years of training, they're basically taught to diagnose and prescribe.
Well, Becky, think of this. I mean, and you alluded to this before in regards that I really bought into it.
Mhm.
Well, pharmaceutical companies have billions and billions of dollars. So whether it's the clinical trials that they have, whether it's their very, very, very successful and very, very influential trainers that they have. I mean, they're very, very good at virtually brainwashing their employees that what you are carrying in your bag is the very, very best. And I would always take a lot of responsibility that I always wanted to know my competitors just as well as I knew my own product. So I could be able to be transparent and be unbiased and really give a balanced statement. But yeah, I mean, whether it's being able to convince employees and pharmaceutical reps that, hey, what you're doing is the best, or whether it's convincing doctors, whether it's convincing doctors by sending them to Hawaii for a medical conference where they're playing golf and they're eating lobster every single day, or yeah, so there's, I mean, pharmaceutical companies are big, big dollars and big, big businesses. And that's one reason why they are chomping at the bit to be able to figure out how they can patent a plant that God just allows to grow.
Thank God we cannot at this point patent Mother Nature, by the way.
No, but the federal government has a patent on CBD, and so it's and that's one reason why they're trying to, and that's why there's these medications like Marinol. Marinol is a synthetic derived version of THC. And does Marinol have a place? Sure, it has a place, but why would you not try the original version, so to speak, rather than before you would like, hey, try cannabis from the plant, and if that doesn't work, maybe try something else like a synthetic version, but why not try what's just naturally there first and foremost?
Well, why do you, and I love that, but we also have to look at, a lot of people have been told that marijuana is bad, that it's bad for you, that it's addictive, it's the gateway drug, right?
I was part of a group of individuals that was being trained on suicide prevention. Something that was very, very significant, very, very near and dear to my heart, specifically in the medical cannabis community with military veterans as well. And this particular therapist was talking about and kind of pointed at some of us in particular and said, "You're addicted to cannabis." And I'm like, listen, I will admit that I am addicted to cannabis if you will admit that you're addicted to water, that you're addicted to food and nutrients and vitamins and sunlight. So yeah, I mean, I believe that we need cannabis in our bodies just as much as we need food, water. So yeah, I mean, if you want to, I mean, different than something like alcohol or again, a synthetic derived molecule.
Right. Something that we actually know does not benefit the body whatsoever. Okay.
And the reason we know it is because it was formed in a laboratory. Right. And I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to see this, but if you take a look at the molecular structure of THC and you compare it side to side to the molecular structure of anandamide, which is the natural endocannabinoid in our body, molecularly structural, they're almost identical. So it's why does this plant work so well in our body? It's because we have a lock and key system that it just fits right with.
I love it. And isn't anandamide, it's like the bliss molecule, right?
It is the bliss molecule. It's what people get when I don't understand these people, but there's people out there, Becky, you might be one of them, that when you go out and you exercise or you run, you get a little bit euphoria. I don't understand these people, but there are people out there. There you go. So there are people out there that get a euphoria. They get a little bit of a high, and that is a flux of anandamide into your central nervous system. Or there's also people that will report when they eat dark chocolate, specifically unrefined dark chocolate, they'll get a little bit of a high, a little bit of euphoria, and that's a flood of anandamide into our bodies.
I love anandamide.
Yes, for sure, and I love THC as well.
Yeah, I love THC too. I started smoking in high school and continued on, and there's been times where I haven't used it for a long period of time, and other times I have, but I do feel that it really helps because I've really stopped consuming alcohol. I will maybe every once a month or that if it's a special occasion. But, I used to use alcohol as my crutch. I mean, my numbing agent, especially in motherhood. I mean, I would drink all the time. And, I really saw how much anxiety it was causing me, how it would for a very short amount of time, take away that edge, but the edge would come back tenfold, the next day. And so when I just decided, I like taking the edge off, and good for people that can take it off with nothing, that can just,
Sure.
I practice meditation. I do all those things. I exercise, but I have to say THC is one of those things that really helps get me grounded and kind of, back to like, the moment.
Right. It's hard to argue with why is it bad to want to feel good. And I remember I was listening to an oncologist speak and this particular oncologist was very, very much a proponent of using medical cannabis for his cancer patients. But he was getting a lot of pushback from some of his colleagues, other oncologists. And the things that were pushing back on him, their pushback was, but you have these patients that are dying. Is your goal really to get them high? And this oncologist that was for it was like, if they're in pain, if they're miserable, if they get a little high, if they get a little outside of their own space, how is a bad thing? And again, I think it goes back to medical providers are trained on practicing medicine based on using robust clinical trials that pharmaceutical companies have spent years, if not decades, well, in the case of COVID-19 vaccine, months, weeks in developing and clinical trials and making sure that it's safe and everything.
Right.
So yeah, it's just it's an interesting conversation for them to understand that we do not need robust clinical trials on a medication where the side effects are dry mouth, red eyes, and waking up at 2:00 in the morning and eating a box of Oreo cookies, whereas the list of pharmaceutical side effects are endlessly long.
Endless. And I just think it's so insane that, like you said earlier, that people are exposed to these pharmaceutical drugs and all these side effects, and they're, it's propaganda. It's just like this, it becomes normal, and it's not normal. It's not normal. And it's so crazy that, holistic, alternative, more naturopathic like medicine, people don't get exposed to it. So they just think, it's the blind leading the blind. And I think that's why we are here today in this, and everyone's sick, diabetic, and, struggling with chronic illnesses. It's insane.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. And there has to be a place for them to go to get this information, just so they can weigh the positives and the negatives and decide. I mean, I consulted with a patient that a male in his early 40s just a couple weeks ago that was just diagnosed with bowel cancer. And so I wanted to educate him on the benefits and the potential relief that he can get from using medical cannabis. And he's decided to use medical cannabis as well as go through traditional. I mean, there's no, and I said to him, hey, listen, there's not a right, there's not a wrong answer. It's what do you going to do personally? What's best for you? What's best for your family, your loved ones, and all your support system? That's what it's about.
I love that, Sam, because you're helping people become informed and advocate for their health, rather than putting all the power in the doctor figure, which everyone believes is this authority figure that knows what's best for them.
And it also makes our job that much more challenging, because the way that we are trained as patients is we go to an office, we see that person for 5, maybe 10 minutes. They send us to another place to go pick up some odd colored and odd shaped type of pills. And we expect to pop that pill and to get virtually immediate response. And then when we either don't get an immediate response or it stops working for us, again, we are trained, brainwashed through propaganda, you call it as what you want it, to then increase the dose of that medication. And that's just not what alternative healthcare, it's not how a natural medicine works.
I love that. And so, and just to kind of piggyback on that, you know, when these people take these medicines, then there's also side effects that then you're going to need another pill for the side effect. I mean, it's just crazy, rather than, hey, let's get to the root, or let's find something that is not going to have these crazy symptoms that you're going to need more pills for.
Well, and we also, as patients, we've also been trained that the way that we recognize that our medication is working is because we feel a side effect. Going back to the conversation about pain medication, how do we know that our Oxycontin, that our Percocet, that our Vicodin is working? It's because I'm high. It's because I've got that head change. And that's the same thing with medical cannabis. If when we get that head change, that is a side effect, but people don't realize is that you can get the medicinal benefits of using cannabis without getting that head change. You don't need to feel side effects of medicine in order to get the relief that you're looking for. And that's the hardest thing in talking with patients that are using traditional medicine and are either trial and tribute, going back and forth with using cannabis and no, it's not working for me. Well, how long have you tried it? Have you really exposed your body to a prolonged period of time of having these these cannabis plant-derived cannabinoids? Because if you don't have it on a regular basis, then you're not giving your endocannabinoid system that fighting chance to create homeostasis and balance within our bodies.
Okay, I love that you just brought up the endocannabinoid. I can never say that word.
You could just refer to it as the ECS.
Okay,
ECS, endocannabinoid
ECS.
system.
So will you educate us about this system? Because I dove into it when I was looking into CBD, and I did a lot of research, and it is fascinating. And I would really love people to understand this system of theirs and how medicinal marijuana and CBD and all the other cannabinoids help us with that system.
Yeah, the endocannabinoid system is an extremely, it's responsible for one thing and one thing only. And it's like, well, is it that really big of an issue if it's just responsible for one thing? Well, but that one thing is to create homeostasis, to create balance within our body. So the examples that I will give to people is, God forbid, I'm out driving around later today and I am in a car accident. I have suffered some physical trauma. My body doesn't recognize, my body doesn't know how to respond to that trauma until my endocannabinoid system says, hey, something's out of whack. We've got to respond in an appropriate manner in order to create homeostasis. So the same thing would happen is I'm a mood disorder patient. So if I'm going into a social situation and I suffer from social anxiety, it's my endocannabinoid system that's responsible for reacting and creating homeostasis. So when I start to have an anxiety attack, it's my endocannabinoid system responsible for attempting to calm me down. The reason mine, yours, and mostly all of our endocannabinoid system does not respond effectively and efficiently is because our body does not create enough natural or endocannabinoids in our body. There are two main ones that our body produces. Anandamide is the bliss molecule, as you mentioned before, and the other one is 2-AG. And so since our body does not make enough of these, that means that our body does not have enough of the compound of the molecules that's responsible for, again, just one thing, but that thing is pretty major in creating homeostasis, creating balance.
Well, and it's also connected to the nervous system, right?
Everything. Right. It's a domino effect. Yes, the endocannabinoid system responds first, and then it tells the next system what to do, and the next system what to do, and the next system what to do. But if the endocannabinoid system does not have the appropriate amount of cannabinoids, whether they're endocannabinoids or
Mhm.
phyto, plant-derived cannabinoids, then it can't respond in an effective manner. And that's when these medical conditions start to surface, whether those medical conditions are diabetes, whether they're Crohn's disease, whether they're multiple sclerosis, or whether they're cancer, God forbid. Our body just can't respond appropriately when they have these, when we're being invaded. And that's why these medical conditions can run rampant within our bodies until we start recognize, okay, yeah, I can pop a pill and that can stop or kill something, but is that really getting to the root of what's causing the medical condition? And what's causing the medical condition is a deficiency in our endocannabinoid system.
And I'd like to just touch on, I can imagine the deficiency is caused by stress, lifestyle, choices. So it's like I can imagine that, because so many of us live this unhealthy lifestyle, all of our systems are challenged.
Yeah.
And so really, Sam, I started taking CBD about a year and a half ago. And it's the full entourage effect, which I'd love to talk about.
Okay.
And one thing I noticed, and from what I understand, and please tell me this is true, it can take a couple weeks to start working in the body. And that's one thing that I notice with a lot of people is when they take just the CBD by itself, right? Which can you talk a little bit now about the entourage effect and why that's so important?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the CBD molecule by itself is fantastic, but there's absolutely clinical evidence out there that when we combined the CBD molecule with other cannabinoids like THC and with other molecules like the terpenes,
Yes.
with other molecules like the flavonoids, and with even the plant material like chlorophyll, and when we combine all of these together, it just turns up the volume of how these work. And so the example that I give is like a flute by itself will play beautiful music, a cello by itself will play beautiful music, and a violin by itself will play beautiful music. But when you combine them all together, you get the goosebump music of an orchestra. And yeah, these individual molecules, these individual compounds, they're fantastic. I love THC, but I know that when I combine THC with other compounds naturally derived from the cannabis plant, it's just going to make it that much better.
I love it. I think that's so great. I think your work is so important. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. So you're in the pharmaceutical industry, right? Selling drugs.
Yes,
And
literally. And that's exactly what my mother would tell people that her son did. Her son's a drug dealer. Yes. I'm not quite sure what she says now, but yeah, that's what she would say. So
That's okay, you're still a drug dealer.
I think I'm a florist. I'm a flower dealer.
Oh, I love that. Yes, let's go with that. So what got you into becoming a florist?
I was fortunate enough in my pharmaceutical career. I guess I don't know if I should say I was fortunate enough because I do. I told this to you, Becky, and I'm not shy to admit this to everybody else, is that I do have some guilt in my pharmaceutical career, and so I was in a position as far as what was going on in my life at the time to be able to take a step back from having a really, really plush job with really, really amazing benefits, and to kind of see the forest for the trees a little bit. And I've always dreamed of driving around to doctor's offices, and instead of popping my trunk and seeing pharmaceutical samples, popping my trunk and seeing cannabis samples. And so I kind of said, well, could this be possible? And that's when I started to apply to jobs that were out there. And I remember the first job interview that I got, they brought me in and they were extremely confused why I was there, because the job was paying $10 an hour and I was making well beyond $10 an hour for a good period of time. And they said, do you realize what you're interviewing for? I said, absolutely. And unfortunately, I did not get that job. But this same company had another another job opening a couple weeks or a month or so later. It wasn't the same job. It was a lesser job. I applied for that again. And they said, this isn't even the same thing. Do you know what you're doing? I said, listen, you just don't get it. I don't care how many times I'm going to apply. I don't care how low the pay is. You're going to see my resume every single time. And fortunate, they were eventually, and that second time they said, okay, they gave me an opportunity because they recognized that I saw the forest for the trees, and I was thankful enough that I talked to my family and I said, hey, give me 1 year. Give me 1 year of making $10 an hour, and see if I can turn this into not necessarily something that is making a ton of money, but something that, because I've kind of, what I've resulted with, what I've convinced myself with, and this is what I tell everybody else, is when you're in healthcare, whether it's Western medicine, alternative medicine, cannabis, whatever, what you're doing, making money is a side effect. It's a side effect of how many people we are influencing and we are potentially helping take back their physical and their mental well-being. So that's what my goal is. My goal is to be financially independent, knowing that that means that I have helped out an obnoxious number of people. And that also carries a very, very heavy weight with me. This is not something that's very, very easy for me to share, but I just found out just a week ago today, actually, that I lost my very, very first patient that I've ever consulted with. It was unfortunately stage 4 pancreatic cancer. So it was certainly one of the worst. But when I got that news from the family that he had passed away, because not only was he a patient, but he was a friend of mine as well, it weighed very, very heavy on me that I failed. His family and him sat at my dining room table and we talked about, hey, how are we going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at this diagnosis? And he was doing really, really well. And but stage 4 pancreatic cancer is a tough one. But thank you, I appreciate it. But then it gives me the opportunity to say, okay, I'm starting this project with some amazing people, Alchemy Wellness. So how do I not only memorialize him, but also make sure that every single warrior, and he was a warrior. He was a warrior that eventually succumbed to his battle, but not all, some warriors win, some warriors don't win. And so what we want to do at Alchemy Wellness, and I've had a couple artists come down to the spot already, is look at creating a mural on the side of our building, the Wall of Warriors, so we can tribute these individuals that's, again, some of them are succumbing to their diagnosis, but some of them are surviving, and we need to have a space for it.
I love that. I think your work is so important, Sam. And, I want to talk a little bit more about what you do, because I don't know if that's super clear. You're obviously extremely educated when it comes to medicinal marijuana and using this, but it's not like it used to be, in high school where you go buy a nickel bag or whatever. And you'd go buy it and you'd just like, okay, cool. And then, it had a bunch of seeds in it. We call it a Mexican shake or something.
Yes, there was more sticks and stems and seeds than there was actual flower.
Yeah, totally. And you're like, I don't even think this is working. I remember one time buying something and the guy ended up just giving us a thing of grass, but little grass. But anyway, it's changed now. Marijuana is different. And especially for people that go in, especially that live in California or Colorado or these states that have it legal, they can walk in and most of the time people want to be like, give me the most THC, right? But if you have anxiety, depression, or you're dealing with a particular challenge or the word's not coming to me. What do these people need to know? Because this is what's so beautiful about what you do is you help educate them on what can be the potential best strain, right, for their quote unquote diagnosis.
Whether it's the best strain or best consumption method. For me, it's about sitting down with a patient, reviewing what is going on, really doing a history and physical, which they're used to doing in a traditional healthcare office. And then what I get an understanding for is not only their experience with medical or recreational cannabis, but also what top 3 to 5 medical conditions, what diagnoses are they looking to potentially get relief from? And then what I do is I do an exhaustive and an obnoxious amount of research on those particular medical conditions, looking at every single clinical study that could potentially be out there, and identifying which specific cannabinoids. So is it THC? Is it CBD? Is it CBG? Is it CBC? Is it THCA, CBDA? Is it the acidic versions of our cannabinoid cousins? Is it they need myrcene, a terpene that's responsible for sleep and the couch lock effect? Or do they need alpha and beta pinene, which is an amazing bronchodilator? So which particular cannabinoids, which particular terpenes do they need? My goal when I'm doing a consultation with a patient is I provide them with, I don't have a better word than a prescription. And trust me, I hate that word prescription. But my goal is to educate patients on what cannabinoids, what terpenes, if we have the information, what flavonoids are going to be potentially best for their medical conditions. And then how can we consume this? Is it best to smoke it? Which would be the inhalation method? Right. Is it best to vaporize it? Is it best to have it as an edible? Is it best to have it as a topical? Is it best to have it as a suppository? What type of delivery method is going to be best? So whether that patient is buying their medical cannabis in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where you and I are located, in Los Angeles, California, in Eugene, Washington, or in New Jersey, I don't care where they're going, but they're going into that dispensary, whether it's a recreational or a medical cannabis dispensary, and they're saying, hey, I suffer from this condition. I need medicine that has a combination of THC, some THCA, some CBD, and that's also high in beta caryophyllene and myrcene. So that is their own prescription. And if they're in a dispensary and they can't provide that information, you walk out and you go to another one, because there's many of them. It's kind of like a Starbucks. They're on every other corner. So go to another one. Absolutely.
That's so incredible. So why do you feel like people aren't getting this education? Because I know when I've gone into medical, marijuana dispensary, it was in Oregon, and I mean, it is overwhelming the amount of stuff they have. And I went in and I'm like, I just want to get really high. And the guy's like, here, this is the best. And man, unfortunately, it wasn't the best experience.
Well, I mean, and you've mentioned on it before in regards to high THC percentages and PTSD and anxiety. I mean, the reason we're focused on THC percentage is because that's all we have. But at the same time, when you were buying it in college, when I was buying it in college, we didn't even have the THC percentage. It was like, okay, does it smell skunky? Does it smell like diesel gas? What does it smell like? Does it smell sweet? And maybe that gave us some sort of idea of what effect it could be. But ever since medical and recreational cannabis has been legalized, it's been all about the THC percentage, whereas again, it's that THC. That THC is fantastic by itself, but when something is lower in THC, what does that mean? That means it's richer in another cannabinoid, and these other cannabinoids and other terpenes have obnoxiously amazing medicinal benefits. And some of them will get you even higher than THC, depending on how you consume it, or some of it won't get you high at all, if that's what you're looking for. And patients have to understand that cannabis is the type of plant that you can truly personalize your experience with cannabis. Patients come into me all the time and they say, I don't want to get high. I don't want to get high. I'm like, that's awesome, because I do. Yeah. So let's save all the high for me, and let me teach you how you can get the amazing benefit from this plant and get virtually zero euphoria whatsoever.
I love that, because I know with a lot of moms, a lot of us, mothers, especially now in times where we're so isolated, our kids are at home. And the world is just, it's crazy right now. We're suffering from a lot of anxiety and depression, and we don't have time to be high. I mean, maybe in the evening, maybe on the weekend, maybe, but even that when you have young kids, you can't get high. I mean, you can, but if something happens, like you've got to be on it.
Well,
And
and that's where, and what you're speaking to there, Becky, is that, hey, listen, when we medicate, and let's say we medicate, and then all of a sudden something happens,
yeah.
and we need to be with it. So then it's a matter of, and this is one thing that I love, and I have an educational piece that's called "What to Do If You're Too High."
Oh,
So I medicated, I'm too high. What am I supposed to do? There are things that I love to educate people that they can put in their tool belt, and they can say, okay, a high dose of CBD will bring me down. Getting some peppercorn balls and chewing on peppercorn balls in the back of my mouth will release beta caryophyllene. Caryophyllene is anti-anxiety and will bring you down. So yeah, there's things that we can do.
that's amazing.
I never want patients to
Yeah.
be deficient. So I want to be able to teach patients that, hey, if you do over medicate, and I've over medicated before, sometimes it's on purpose, sometimes it's not, just to kind of see what it's going to make me feel like.
Right.
But I've gotten a call from a patient before saying, Sam, I just medicated with this and I'm high. And I'm like, that's awesome. They're like, no, I feel uncomfortable. What do I do? I'm like, you know exactly what to do. We've talked about this
Yeah.
before. And after they just run through it in their head, patients start to calm down, because what we have to remember about cannabis, different than every single pharmaceutical product that's out there, cannabis is non-toxic. So for all you mothers out there,
Yeah.
for all you mothers that have young children, if
Yeah.
you ever come home and you see your child sitting on the floor eating a box of crayons, if you look on that box of crayons and it says non-toxic, there's no reason to call 911. There's no reason to rush them to the hospital. They're probably going to throw up. They're probably going to have diarrhea. Their
Yeah.
tummy's going to hurt. But
Yeah.
if it doesn't say non-toxic, you better rush them to the emergency room to have their
Oh
stomach
yeah.
pumped.
Right.
Cannabis is non-toxic. Unless you choke on cannabis or have a whole bunch of it fall on you, it's impossible to die from cannabis. But
That could happen.
if you have that much cannabis, please invite me over.
Yeah, totally. I'll help you with that.
But my goal with educating patients is to make sure that they have a positive experience with cannabis. And so if it is a matter of, hey, you're going to consume a very, very heavy dose of cannabis that is very, very rich in THC, you're going to get that head change. I want to be able to set them up to succeed so they don't have a negative experience, because when they have a negative experience, they will give up on it, and then they will spread that negative experience around. And it's just because they were not set up to succeed.
I love it. I love it, Sam. So what medical conditions are actually approved? We talked about this before, but I'd love the audience to know what medical conditions are actually approved for medicinal marijuana.
Well, it's going to be different in every single state.
Okay.
So here in the state of New Mexico, we have 28 approved medical conditions.
Okay.
And it's what's very interesting about the state of New Mexico is that we were the very first state to have post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, as an approved medical condition. And every single state since then has followed suit. But at the same time, it's very interesting to talk about PTSD because high THC percentages can exacerbate, can certainly bring on some of those feelings. And that's where not only do I educate patients in regards to what are they looking for, but I'm also educating the dispensary employees. I'm going into dispensaries and I'm making sure that when they have a patient that comes in and says, hey, what's the highest THC? But before they turn around and they grab the highest THC percentage, I tell them all, you do not have the right to give that patient anything. You do not have the right to answer that patient's question until you ask that patient a minimum of 3 to 5 questions. Can you please help me understand what medical condition are you looking to medicate today? How are you looking to consume your medical cannabis? What successes have you? I mean, we have to be able to ask these questions. And if that patient says, well, I am a PTSD patient, then we are going to please educate that patient that, hey, it's not all about THC percentage. What are you looking to accomplish? Maybe you need some myrcene. Maybe you just need a little bit more CBD in your life to be able to help calm you down. But because we're just all focused on that THC percentage, and what's very interesting in regards to that PTSD being approved for New Mexico DOH is out of the 28 medical conditions, 27 of them, and this is usually the case in every single state, the majority of them are very, very black and white. You either have cancer or you don't. You either have Crohn's disease or you don't. But post-traumatic stress disorder is a little bit more subjective, especially in 2020 when we're all dealing with a viral pandemic. We all have a little bit of
we all have
PTSD.
trauma. Absolutely. Yes. Everyone's traumatized.
Yes, yes, and I say this half jokingly, half serious. Whether you're like family members of mine that were in the military and they have severe PTSD because of their military service, or you're like me and my mom locked me in my bedroom when I was 10 years old and didn't give me my dinner, and that's why I'm on my therapist chair. Whether it's true PTSD or whatever, we all have some PTSD in this day and age.
We absolutely do, absolutely. So, okay, so you also help educate doctors, right? And I mean,
I do.
Okay, so kind of in your work, tell us, because this is what I love. I love that this behemoth medical system and healthcare system is slowly starting to open up to this idea of medical marijuana. So I would love to share, like, who are you sharing this information with? And what do you see as, I don't know, if you were to predict the next 10, 15 years, what do you see happening in this area?
Well, one of the things that I love being able to do is leverage the relationships that I've developed over the last 10 plus years as a pharmaceutical rep. And I appreciate that and I covered from Durango, Colorado, all the way down to El Paso. So I had a very, very large territory and a lot of really, really good relationships. And I'm always appreciative that when I'm walking in there and carrying a bag of cannabis information instead of a bag of pharmaceutical information, that they're at least receptive because they remember how I was in their office as a pharmaceutical rep, that I wasn't always about, hey, for the next 5 patients that you see that suffer from migraines, can I count on you to prescribe my medication? Because that's the most obnoxious and the most narcissistic attitude that a rep or a pharmaceutical company could have. But that's how pharmaceutical reps are trained. But they appreciated that that's not how I came into their office as a pharmaceutical rep. And that's not how I'm coming in as a representative of the cannabis plant, because that's what I'm looking to do. I don't necessarily care about promoting one dispensary over another. Because the medical cannabis dispensary is still very boutique-y. What I find at one dispensary is going to be different than what I find at another dispensary. So what I've done is I've vetted pretty much every medical cannabis dispensary in the state of New Mexico to know who does what well, so I can help direct not only patients, but also healthcare providers that, hey, if you have a patient that is in need of this, send them to this particular dispensary. And it's always a very, very interesting dialogue that I have with a healthcare provider, because every single one of them, I mean, it's like a script that they have all memorized, because they all say to me, Sam, until I cannot recommend medical cannabis until there are these robust clinical trials. And I get your eye roll. I get the eye. I do the eye roll
right there.
but listen, Becky, we have to understand their position. I get it. Listen, that's what they're trained on. They're trained on these robust clinical trials. But what they also have to realize is pharmaceutical companies do these robust clinical trials to make sure that medications are safe, because the doctor's creed is to do no harm. But there's also times that these medications get approved by the Food and Drug Administration, and then shortly thereafter, they get pulled from the market, because now with post-marketing data, we have seen that the 20,000 patients that they did the clinical trial on, it wasn't as big as now the 20 million people that are now taking this medication, as well as doctors will say to me, and my response a lot of times to them when they say, hey, I can't recommend medical cannabis until there are these robust clinical trials, I'll remind them, doctor, the last time I was in your office, I was promoting whatever drug for, let's say it's for overactive bladder. You started to prescribe this medication for your patients suffering from overactive bladder. You started to get success with that medication for treating overactive bladder, but you also started to tell me that in those same patients, their blood pressure started to drop. So you started to use that medication with your patients that were hypertensive. There's no robust clinical trials to use that medication off-label. You're using your clinical practice to be able to, I'm asking you to do the exact same thing with medical cannabis, a medication that, again, the side effects are dry mouth, red eyes, waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, eating a box of Oreos. Not the case when they use medication off-label.
Totally. Or maybe some like dark chocolate, 90% dark chocolate with some mint in it. No Oreos, people.
Yeah, right. There you go. I'm sorry. I don't.
Come on, Sam,
mine is Oreos.
Who I am.
I understand, but if you ask my family, then my family will say yes. Sam will kill a box of Oreo cookies.
Oreos are so good. I do. They're so delicious.
Yes.
No, that's so true. But also going back to these robust trials, I mean, aren't most of these trials funded by the pharmaceutical companies themselves?
Of course they're funded by pharmaceutical
they're not.
companies.
I wouldn't even say they're robust studies. I think they're just shit, if you ask me.
Well, they're robust in the sense that they encompass a large population, a large diverse population that is also over a diverse territory as far as whether it's in this country, internationally. And so that's what they mean by diverse clinical trials. But yeah, if you look at any clinical trials for medication, it's very, very rare that a pharmaceutical company will do a clinical trial against their competitor. They do a clinical trial against what? Placebo. Well, it better be better than placebo, because if it's not better, and I'm a big believer in the placebo effect. Our brain is very, very powerful.
Absolutely.
So placebo absolutely does work. But yeah, just to show that it works a little bit better than placebo, yay, good job, guys.
Well, and I'm just flabbergasted at these like anti-anxiety and depression drugs that literally the side effects are anxiety, depression, and suicide. And I have a really incredible friend that actually committed suicide. It was horrible, and he was medicated. He was given anti-anxiety, antidepressants, and as I saw him over the year that he was on this, he completely changed. Like on a physical level, he was completely someone different. I had never seen him so unhappy. And this is what just pulls at my heart, is that these people are suffering. They are prescribed anti-anxiety and depression, which I was too. I just knew innately there wasn't something right. Thank God I listened to my gut. But there's so many side effects here. And then you go to, using cannabis and helping your endocannabinoid ECS system. Sometimes I get it right. It's like 1 out of every 10. That actually can truly give you long-lasting effects, and the side effects are red eyes, right?
Right. But the problem is it takes, as we talked about before, it takes time to saturate our endocannabinoid system to be able to get a response. So patients will come in and they'll be like, oh, I tried CBD. I tried that. It didn't work for me. Well, how long did you try it? A couple weeks. Did you try it every single day at the same time? For me, it's after I brush my teeth, it's the first thing that I do. I put my oil underneath my tongue. I walk around my house for about 5-10 minutes. Nobody's allowed to talk to me because it's underneath it's trying to absorb sublingually so I can get that quick onset of effect. But it has to be the same time. And we have to motivate and basically beg patients to journal their cannabis journey so they can keep their finger on the pulse of what's working, what dose is working, what's not working. If you recognize that there's certain terpenes, alpha and beta pinene or beta caryophyllene, that brings on my anxiety effect, and let's make sure we look at cannabis that has none of those or very low in those terpenes. There's ways that we can get those patients the medicine that they need without the side effects. And what's very, very sad, and this happens most of the time, here in the state of New Mexico, please don't quote me on this, but I think we have approximately 101,000 patients in the medical cannabis program. And out of those 101,000, approximately 54,000 of them are post-traumatic stress disorder patients. Wow. So that means that I'm not a math whiz, but I think that's more than half. So that's more than half of patients that are walking into medical cannabis dispensaries are going in there with already mood disorders that could be exacerbated, made worse by high THC percentages. And we just have to let them know that there is so much more in this amazing plant than that THC. And I've said it before, I've said it again, I love THC, but there is so much more in it than that alone.
No, I love it. I think this is so important for people to understand. And what I love about it and what you said is it's not a quick fix. And
Right.
so doing the work, journaling, working with someone like you to help them understand what is going to be the best bio-individual, right,
Absolutely.
concoction to help
Well,
them with what they
and
need.
it even gets down to, okay, when a patient says, if I'm recommending edibles and they say edibles don't work for me, okay, let's think about it. THC binds to fat. If you're very, very thin and you don't have a lot of body fat, well, that's one reason. And then we think about, well, what kind of environment are we putting that edible? What is our gut health like? If the gut health is not a hospitable environment, well, how is this medicine going to be metabolized and absorbed? As well as what is in the medicine? Is it made with a distillate oil? Is it made with a butane hash oil? Is it made with an RSO oil? What is in the edible? It just could, this is such an individualized plant. So I recognize, hey, there are certain edibles that hit me hard. And there are some edibles that I can take a 500 milligram something and it does nothing for me because it's made with a type of cannabis that just my body does not react to. So it's letting patients know that there are differences out there. And just because you have a failure with one thing, that doesn't mean you can't write it off altogether. But it is a challenge because patients are wanting that quick fix. And really the only quick thing that we get from using cannabis is, number one, we get that head change, we get that euphoria. And then the other thing that patients will certainly report that comes on very, very quickly when they use inhalation is like an anti-nausea type of effect that, hey, I can, if I don't have an appetite or if I'm nauseous, I can smoke, I can inhale my cannabis and virtually immediately I can go eat my food.
Well, and that's what, now I'm not saying that I recommend pregnant women to do this, but I see a lot of pregnant women that have, the morning sickness and the nausea, and then they're prescribed these pills that have side effects that can literally, I mean, it's like deadly to the baby. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at any single medication, whether it's prescription medication or over the counter, and I'm not talking about I'm not talking about vitamins for pregnancy. I'm not talking about prenatal vitamins. All of these medications are going to come with a pregnancy category C, which means that this medication was not tested in pregnant women because the risk is far higher than the potential benefit. Medical cannabis is virtually the same thing. We're not going to test it in patients because of the risk. What do we know about medical cannabis? What do we know about cannabis, specifically THC, is it does show that it can slow the progressive of a developing brain. So what is a fetus? A fetus has a developing brain. So could it slow the progression down of a developing brain in a fetus like it does in an adolescent? Absolutely. Does that mean that it kills brain cells? Absolutely not. Does that mean that that particular individual cannot come back from that slow progression? Absolutely not. You can absolutely come back from that. But that is one of the reasons why specifically high THC percentages or high THC ratios, when we're talking about CBD and THC ratios, are not necessarily recommended in adolescents because their brains are developing. But then the exact reverse happens when we are 60, 70, 80 years old. The THC and the cannabis then has a protective capabilities over our brain. So it's just a matter of what are we going through. But yes, when I've been humbled enough to consult with a pregnant woman and their family, it's always, it's what is the benefit and what is the risk? And if that pregnant woman is severely nauseous and they are losing weight rather than gaining weight, which is what you're supposed to do, then, and it's all about nausea, then yes, I would prefer them to consume cannabis at the lowest dose possible. Don't use your cannabis like you normally were using when you were not pregnant. Use it at the lowest dose possible. And that's where it goes back to journaling. So know, okay, what is the lowest dose possible? What is the type of cannabis, the delivery system, the consumption method, the strain? What do I need to be able to give me that response at the lowest dose possible?
I love that, Sam, because it's really is you are helping people be informed so that they can make the best decision for them rather than being like, this is what you need to do.
Right. And that is the mentality of, I want to give you a fish so you eat for a day. And that is what traditional healthcare wants us to do. So we continue to come back. You have to continue to give me a fish, because I can't make synthetic medicine in my backyard, but I can grow cannabis in my backyard. Totally. So it's about not giving people a fish, but teaching them how to fish so they can be, listen, I love the medical cannabis program, and I don't care what state you're in. I'm also I'm a pessimist at heart. These are programs that are managed by the government, whether it's your state government or maybe one day it's the federal government. What has the government shown to do? They give it and they can take it away. They took our right away to consume cannabis in 1937 because it was proven to be beneficial, and they could take it away from us again. And that's why we have to be able to grow the medicine in our backyard. And that doesn't mean I'm going to be making cartridges or I'm going to be making my own concentrate or wax, but it will. But we all need to have access. And it's always a very funny conversation when I'm talking to a dispensary owner and they don't believe in patients being able to grow their own cannabis, because when you own a dispensary, you have to get your cannabis tested to make sure that it's clean of any heavy metals or pesticides or mycotoxins or anything that could be potentially harmful. And their response is, well, Sam, the medicine that you're growing in your backyard isn't being tested, so how do we know that it's clean? And my mind just explodes, because it's like, well, the tomatoes I'm growing, I'm not testing those either. And Whole Foods doesn't seem to care. No. The cucumbers, that's not being tested. And so it's unfortunate, but these dispensary owners get greedy and they see us growing the medicine in our backyard as taking away profit from them, rather than just having, hey, this is a cannabis community. Let's come together and let's heal people and educate people on how to take back their health.
I love it. I think that's how we need to move forward. And also it's like, not everyone's going to grow, just like if you were smart, you'd grow all your own food and save tons of money, but people aren't going to do that.
No, of course not. Absolutely. Yeah. And, I wanted to touch on one other thing that I love bringing up to people when people say, hey, I need the highest THC percentage. Yeah. And sometimes this backfires. It doesn't work every single time. But I will ask that person if they ever consume alcohol. And if the answer to the question is yes, I'm like, oh, you must only drink Everclear. You must go for the highest alcohol percent. Or do you drink something that makes you feel good? Or do you drink something that makes you taste good? Or do you pair what you're drinking with what you're consuming? You don't go after the highest alcohol content. So why are you going after the highest THC content?
Yeah, I love it. I think that's so good, Sam. First of all, so how can people find you before we wrap it up? Because I really do feel we're going to have people who are like, my mom or my uncle or even themselves, they want to be like, you know what? I've really thought about using it. I've used it before. Maybe I've had this experience, but I really need help and guidance. So how can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find Alchemy Wellness online at www.alchemy-wellness.org. You can email me directly at sam@alchemy-wellness.org. Our phone number is 505-225-1105. We have a patient intake survey questionnaire that we ask all patients to complete prior to being matched with an appropriate consultant, whether that's myself or any of the other team members that we have. But listen, I want everybody to understand at the end of the day, it's about parity. It's about, listen, there's no place for people to go. Where do people go to get information on cannabis. They're going online, and how do we vet those sources that are online? We go into medical cannabis dispensaries, and unfortunately, I think it depends on what state you're in, but unfortunately in the state of New Mexico, there's not a standard education tool. So what you hear from one dispensary, and I've heard from some very scary things in some dispensaries here in New Mexico, but what you hear from one is not consistent to another, and there has to be consistency. When you are in the pharmaceutical industry, it doesn't make a difference if you're promoting a product and you live in upstate New York or you live in Southern California. You are trained the exact same way and you communicate the exact same points because you are regulated by the federal government and the FDA. We just have to come together as a cannabis community and kind of have that consistency throughout and provide these services for patients. And yeah, whether it's a patient, whether it's a caregiver, if you're a medical provider out there and you just need a little bit of guidance, because listen, as a medical provider, you have the ability now to bill insurance companies based off of ICD-10 coding and billing. You can bill them for cannabis type of conversations that you're having with your patients, because in New Mexico, opioid use disorder is now on the approved medical condition, and insurance companies would much rather a doctor talk to a patient about medical cannabis than go ahead and write a prescription for a narcotic.
Amen. Oh my gosh, Sam, this is so great. So great. I'm going to have all those links, your email and everything in the show notes, so everyone can reach you and, just reach out if they need help. So thank you so much for coming on our podcast.
Thank you. I'm humbled. I'm overwhelmed. I was obnoxiously anxious prior to, but listen, I've gotten to the point, I think I shared this with you, Becky, before. I love standing behind a counter and having patients come to me and me being able to help them. But I can't do that and affect every single person and every single patient's out there. So to have the platform that you are providing, I'm obnoxiously humbled, because I just want the ability to, like I said, to create parity, to shine a spotlight on a plant that was criminalized for no reason other than it provided health and wellness. And that was seen as a threat to big business and the federal government. And so that's all we want to do here at Alchemy Wellness. So please reach out, send your friend, your family, your mailman, your butcher, whoever you believe needs a little bit of cannabis love in their life. And you don't have to get high. Save the high for people like me. We can help get you healthy. With people like Becky as well, we can help get you healthy by helping to put you on the right path of your cannabis journey.
I love it. Well, I totally support you and your mission, and I'm so excited to see this message get out there, Sam, because I really think it's important information. And now is such a critical time for people to start really questioning those petrochemicals that they're putting in their body and say, hey, what if something more natural, something that can actually work with my body? Maybe we look on that. And that it's just a switch of a mindset. It's just a new perspective. And I think we really gave people that today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate the opportunity.
You got it. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Please visit Sam on his website. Check the show notes to get a hold of him. And we'll see you on the next podcast. Bye.